Welcome to the second part of the type tool. In this section, we're just going to go briefly over the other formatting options known as the paragraph formatting controls. With your text or type tool selected to the left, go ahead right up here and you'll notice under the letter A there is a symbol for paragraph. If you click on that, that will give you your different view of your paragraph formatting controls. Now the good news is a lot of these things we're going to go over are basically the same thing you've seen before. So for example, I'm going to go down here and just select all of my text by left clicking and dragging over my letters, just to show you what every one of these does. The first one's align left, just as you remembered from the previous section. The one after that's align center. So far we're looking like we're doing the same exact thing, right? Because then this one's align right. Followed by that is your align towards spine. That's again for book and magazine. This again is indenting your left. The one following is indenting your right. So for example, if we were align right and we did the indent right, you would see the difference. There we go. So again, so far a lot of these things we went over are the same. Now this one's a little bit different. This one's called space before. And when you click on space before, it doesn't seem like it really does much. But what it's actually doing is putting little space before the first line. Now, since we have a restricted area, you're actually not seeing that happen. And the same thing with this second one here called space after. Space after does the same thing, but instead, it puts the space after the end of the text. That way, if you're trying to do like a tab over, or you're trying to get extra space before you write something else, you have the availability and the actual proximity set through these two options. The one following it is your bulleted list. So you can end up making bulleted lists for your website, for magazines, listing things here and there. If you don't want it, just click right back off of it, and boom, there we go. The next part here is your paragraph style. Just like the character style on the formatting controls for character selection, you can basically go from a basic paragraph to specific different paragraphs that you've imported previously. Now I undid both of those moves just by holding down Command and hitting the letter Z twice, just in case you were wondering. And last but not least, inside of this same box you have the option to hyphenate letters or words. So if you end up trying to put a word in that needs a hyphen right between it, it will do that. And if it runs off the end of the page and the word is too big to fit on one line, it will also hyphenate from one line to the next. After that, you have your do not align to baseline grid, which basically stays away or keeps the text away from not aligning to the first line that you have. Following that is your number of columns. So you can actually create columns, kind of like make your own little version of the book, or even if you're doing an article or a magazine, you can split your text into two different columns just to have more space and just to be more organized. After that, we have span columns. So we can end up making the columns span to a degree. So for example, you'll notice that span 2, span 3, how instead of running away or end up disappearing, none of it's disappearing at all. So you can actually span your text over different columns or so many columns. And then after that, you get a lot of the same things we've seen before. You can change your font type all over again to the far right. You can end up changing the size of your font. And then if we go further right, it's the same stuff as you saw before. Pretty easy stuff. You can do all caps. You can put a superscript in. You can put an underline in. And then we get right back to the kerning method, which again, we just leave on metrics. And then after that, let's go down to the second row. The second row, you'll notice a lot of it's the same stuff as we've seen before until we get more in the middle of the tools. So for example, this is justifying with the last line align left. This one is justify with last line align center. This one is justify all the lines. And this one's a line away from spine, just as we've seen before. And same thing here again, you'll notice that this is the first line left indent. So there we go. I'll go back just to show you what it does. And then same thing, if we aligned it right, you would end up having the indent on the last line to the right. Now these next few tools are a little bit different. This one's called drop cap number of lines. So basically, how many letters can fit on a line? How many drop cap numbers? So if you end up having a capitalization or something of that nature, it'll end up limiting how much can fit on one line. As you see, my T is really big and it's making this very strange space. That's all because I'm dropping the rest of the letters out of the way. And this is the exact opposite. You drop cap one or more characters. So this one will end up going left or right. And in this case, it's not doing too much for me because I'm again in a restrained space at the moment involving my bounding box. After that, you have your numbered lists. So if you don't like bullets and you like numbers, you can put this one on, and every time you hit the return key to do another part of the list, it will automatically number it for you. Then we get back to our paragraph style, which we already discussed over. And then after that, we're going to go to align to baseline grid. So there you go. It's aligning all the text to exactly where your grid or baseline starts, which is right where this basically is. So imagine a line that would be right underneath those words. That is your baseline grid. After that, you'll notice that we also have gutter. Now, gutter we're not going to talk about too much, but for those of you that are curious, it's basically the space between a magazine spine that you would end up having extra space, kind of like a margin. And later, you'll end up realizing that gutter is a printing term that we can end up applying through the InDesign print feature. After that, you have the horizontal cursor position. This is basically just telling you where in the document is your cursor right now. So for example, right now I'm 1.12 inches approximately in, but if I end up clicking somewhere else, you'll notice that the value changes. So this is a really easy way to be able to tell someone or identify exactly where you want to put a piece of information or a letter. And then after that, here we go again. You have your style, so you can go from regular to bold. Just to show you what I mean here, let me get one that actually gives you a bold sample. So for example, if the text you selected does in fact, or the font you selected does in fact have a specific style, you can end up selecting it right here. And voila, now we got some bold text. And then following that, we have our leading, which we discussed earlier. And then after that, we also have our small caps. We have our subscript. We have our strike through. And last but not least, we have our good old tracking, which is basically the space between each letter. So there you go. A really quick run through of the paragraph formatting control panel. A lot of it's the same. There's only a few different tools we used. But you know, it's always useful to know the ins and outs and the several different ways to be able to apply this information to your newfound document.